Okay. Now I got 0 attendees. What happened to the 3 that were in the waiting room? Oh, here they are. Just 2.
Yeah, just takes technology a minute to catch up.
Yeah. Welcome. If you'd like to type in the chat box where you're located, that will be very, very beneficial. We'll start in about a minute and a half. Let the late people get on. If you want to let us know where you are, that's good. Not a lot of people do. Anybody want to type in the chat box? Let us know where you're located. I'm in Lexington, Kentucky. Got 1 more minute. Get any last minute people coming on. It's my next webinar. Okay, I have 3 o'clock, so I don't like taking up other people's time. So we're going to get started. My name's Dr. Jackie Jacob, and I am the Poultry Extension Specialist here at the University of Kentucky. As part of my position, I coordinate the E-Extension Cooperative Community of Practice for small and backyard flocks. E-Extension being the National Extension Service online. So there's different communities of practices dealing with different issues, and I coordinate the small backyard flocks. We have these monthly meetings. We also have a blog. We have articles. We have the webinars that are recorded, and this one is being recorded. I hope, make sure. Yeah, it's recorded. The recordings get posted, so you can go and view. You can see the many hundreds of videos that we have done in the past. If you'll see if you can find something to answer your question. If you can't find it, you can email me, or you can do the Ask extension to get your question. Unfortunately, it can take a few days for the specialist to answer. So as part of our monthly webinars, this time we're going to look at some of the predators and whether they are friend or foe. A lot of people think of rat snakes as predator, but they aren't always. And to try and convince you of that is Anna Wiker from University of Kentucky Forestry Department, or Forestry College. Is it College of Forestry or Department of Forestry?
Department.
Okay.
Now that I hear it said out loud, I'm like, where do I work?
Yeah, sometimes you just go to work. You don't think about it. While she's presenting, I will be on mute and will shut off my video. If you have a question at any time, you can type it in the chat box or in the Q&A. I will be monitoring both. If the question is a clarification of something that Anna is talking about at that time, I will pop up and ask for the clarification. Otherwise, the questions will get held to the end. But if you're like me, you're going to forget the question if you don't write it down right away. So if you think of something you want to ask, chat box or the Q&A box, and I'll be monitoring it. So Anna, you want to introduce yourself, tell them what you do, and do your presentation?
Yes, absolutely. I'll go ahead and share my slides if that's okay. And Dr. Jacob, if you just want to holler at me if things don't look right at any time, and I'll do my best to fix the technology of it all.
Looks good.
But as long as everything's looking good, let's go full speed ahead. So thank you so much for having me on, first of all, Dr. Jacob. I am, a snake enthusiast, full disclosure, wildlife enthusiast, but I also am a small flock owner. So this is a really exciting crossover for me. I appreciate you having me on. Hopefully, we'll have a good little chat this afternoon, have a good little talk. And even if we don't agree by the end, that's okay. We don't have to agree, but I appreciate you all being on here and hearing me out about snakes, whether you're here for the replay, for the recording, or you're here live this afternoon. So first of all, just a tiny little bit about me. I'm currently the outreach coordinator for the Kentucky Master Naturalist Volunteer Program with the University of Kentucky Department of Forestry and Natural Resources. The Master Naturalist Program, if you're in the United States, Extension offers it in some states. Not every state has the program. Many people are more familiar with the Master Gardener Program, and the Master Naturalist Program is very similar to that. It's a, many week-long training where you gain a certification in this case, becoming a naturalist, natural resources through extension. So it's a really cool program. I'm happy to chat with anyone further about that if you're in Kentucky or if you are in another state and you'd like to be in touch with whoever coordinates your Master Naturalist program, or maybe you don't have one in your state yet and you want to start one. Also cool. My background is in wildlife management. So I have, an associate's degree in wildlife resource management, and then a bachelor's of science in wildlife management. So I am coming at this not from an agricultural necessarily angle, but a wildlife management angle and a wildlife angle. But lest, I don't want to get up on my soapbox and, be preaching about saving the animals and never defending your flock from predators or anything like that. I am a small flock owner, uh, and that's primarily chickens right now, but I've also done ducks and turkeys, and I do understand that as a small flock owner, as a small farmer, pest control and predator control is really important. And I don't hold that against anyone. I understand, it can be very devastating to deal with predators and pests in your flock. Now, I am personally of the opinion that we can possibly maybe have a friendlier relationship with our local snakes and our local rat snakes in particular than many of us might currently have. And if you don't have a friendly relationship right now, I hope that you'll at least hear me out, and we can certainly discuss more in the comments if you have any questions about rat snakes as chicken predators. So before you see snakes and leave the webinar, um, here's my quick plug. No matter the scale of your property, whether you have a small urban little backyard chicken flock, or a large scale operation, pest management is critical for any type of agriculture, right? On any type of scale, gardens, poultry flocks, livestock, whatever it might be, pest management and controlling pests is crucial to the health and well-being of your food, right? Um, Now, I know that this is a picture of a snake eating an egg, and that's not what we like, but I'm here to tell you that snakes can be an environmentally friendly aid to on-farm pest control. And when I talk about pest control in the context of this presentation, I'm mostly talking about rodents. That's something that I've really struggled with on my farm over the years. And it's something that worldwide has a really big impact on poultry and poultry production. Remember, I don't care if you hate snakes. The snakes don't care if you hate snakes. You don't have to like snakes. You just have to, be coworkers that pass by each other in the barn and, pretend you don't see each other. You both have the same goal in mind, less mice and rats and rodents. So you can kind of work towards that common goal and you do not have to like each other. So I'm not going to try to convince you to like snakes. I'm just going to try to convince you to let the snakes live on your property. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to cover snake identification and biology. And we're not going to go through every snake ever. We're going to focus on rat snakes, which are ones that many people are familiar with if you're in the United States. I'm less familiar with species outside the US, but we can certainly chat about that in the comments, or you can get in touch with me later if it's something you're curious about, and I can point you in the right direction. But we are going to have kind of a US centric focus on the snakes that we talk about today. Um, we're going to talk about where they can fit into a pest management plan on your property, your farm, your small flock, whatever it might be, what that looks like using snakes as part of your pest management. And we're going to wrap it up with some tips and tricks for coexisting with snakes. Um, and, again, coexisting, not forming a best friends forever relationship with snakes. Why are we talking about it? Well, I'm sure many of you are aware that, especially since COVID, there's really been an increase in interest in sustainability, backyard homesteading, raising your own food, being aware of where your food came from, being aware of, the ways in which your food was produced, um, being aware of what we produce and put into the food chain. So I think that people are right now, you know, very much interested in ways that we can responsibly participate in the food chain, right? And we all live in an ecosystem, not just, when we think of an ecosystem, that's the definition of it there. Um, the complex of living organisms, their physical environment, and all their interrelationships in a particular unit of space. Just a fancy way for saying all of the organisms in a spot and their relationships with each other. So you're part of that, and your chickens are part of that. Your poultry is part of that. You have an on-farm ecosystem. You have a backyard ecosystem. Um, and it consists of everything from that physical space to the wildlife within it, to the soil microbiome, to the, you know, microorganisms, to the insects, to the predators like snakes and hawks and owls. Um, and again, that doesn't preclude us. We are also part of that ecosystem. And we bring things with us and we take things away. We're very much like an apex predator in our ecosystems. We bring things with us like the Norway rat, which is an introduced species in many areas, and one that is very detrimental to poultry. We bring our pets, we bring our chickens, we bring ourselves, and we also subtract things from the ecosystem. So many people's first response, when seeing, you can see there's, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a little snake and there's a little kestrel up there. A lot of the times our first inclination when we are encountering a predator, like a snake, a hawk, an owl, a coyote, a fox, depending on where you live, our first inclination is to remove that predator from the ecosystem, right? Because we're thinking, oh my goodness, I have kids, I have chickens, I have a small dog, I have whatever it might be. And we do see that predator as a threat to those things, which is fair. That can be the case. I will never tell you that predators cannot cause issues in a farm, whether it's an urban environment, suburban, or rural. Um, However, when you start go into an ecosystem and you start removing pieces, specifically these predators like snakes, usually what you'll see is an increasing abundance of kind of these lower level organisms that often cause problems for us as farming folks, right? Insects, rats, mice, rodents, um, pest insects, ticks, parasites of all kinds. There's lots of different, things that sort of experience a population boom when we remove the predators from an ecosystem. Um, so just something to keep in mind, there is a selfish interest that we have as humans and flock owners and farmers to keep ecosystems healthy and intact for the good of everything that lives there, including us. So on that note, let's switch over to a little bit about the snakes that we are focusing on today. A little bit about their identification and a little bit about their biology, what makes them, what makes a rat snake, and what makes them sort of uniquely suited for coexisting with humans in a helpful way. So the snake that I think of when I think of rat snakes is the gray rat snake. It's this guy in these pictures here. The snake is pretty widespread across the eastern United States. And there's a whole host of snake scientist drama that you could get into if you care to do so about the way that these snakes are divided up into species. You can see here on the screen, they were in one genus, so they had a scientific grouping where they were all the different kinds were stuck together in a big bundle, and they were just called black rat snakes. And then some scientists came in and started splitting them apart. And now rat snakes in the United States are all considered to be in the genus Pantherophis, but split into different species. Basically, this is just background information. It's not, you won't get quizzed on this ever in your lifetime unless you're pursuing a really specific education. But just know that when we talk about rat snakes, human scientists have all kinds of ideas about the way that they're divided into different species of rat snakes. And those don't really have any bearing on, how they interact with their environment, right? They don't know what they're called to us. And they don't care what their scientific name is. So across the United States, here's sort of an overview of some different rat snake species, all in that Pantherophis genus. So all in that rat snake group, but divided into different species. So you can see we've got our eastern rat snake, our gray rat snake, western rat snake, eastern fox snake, western fox snake, Great Plains rat snake, corn snake, and Baird's rat snake. It doesn't really matter. Certainly, it helps for you to be familiar with which one occurs in your geographic area for identification purposes, but for the purposes of, pest control, all these snakes are going to function in approximately the same way in their environment. So for the most part, rat snakes in general are species that occur in the United States east of the Great Plains. That's not like an, one size fits all exact answer. You can see there's some little dots here and there, in the Rocky Mountains and all the way to the West Coast where, people have had sightings of different species of rat snakes, probably mostly corn snakes, I would guess. But rat snakes in general are an eastern United States species, sort of the Great Plains and Texas eastward. And if you're curious about what species of rat snake occurs in your area, if you're within that area and you just want to know, like, hey, which one of all these guys is going to be the one that I'm probably most likely to encounter, feel free to drop your location in the chat and we can get that figured out for you. Or it might be something that your local extension folks can shed some light on for you as well. Now, like I mentioned, rat snakes, no matter what species they're going to kind of have similarities in terms of their biology and their behavior. And that's what kind of gets them the reputation that they have of, maybe being troublesome around a home poultry flock or a farm. They're definitely a species where folks have a love-hate relationship with them. Many people do not like to see them around a chicken coop. Many people, have very strong feelings about letting rat snakes live around the farm. And there are some, certainly some reasons for that that are justified that have to do with the rat snake's behavior. But that behavior is also something that makes rat snakes potentially a really valuable ally in pest control. So diet, right off the bat, you might have guessed from the name, rat snakes have a preference for rodents in general. They will also eat eggs, which may be not surprising to some of our eastern US chicken farmers. And they will eat bird nestlings as well. And they'll eat prey beyond this. This is certainly where their preference is, but they will eat other things. Habitat, these snakes are generally very comfortable with people. This is how they can get into trouble. They are not worried about living in buildings, in barns, in suburban areas. You know, they oftentimes live out their lives in very close proximity to people. If anyone has ever found a shed snake skin, for example, in your house or in your barn, it's very likely one that belongs to a rat snake because they are often really comfortable hanging out with people. You know, if there's a snake in your basement, it's probably a rat snake, and you live in the range for rat snakes, of course. The way that they hunt is they're not, you know, when you think of a snake hunting, you might have this image of a snake striking and injecting venom and killing its prey that way. But the way that rat snakes hunt is that they are constrictors. So they will stalk down their prey, they will loop the coils of their body around it, and tighten, causing reduced blood flow and cardiac arrest of the prey item. They're also arboreal in their hunting habits, which is just a fancy way of saying they're climbing all over stuff. Pretty much nothing and nowhere is safe from a rat snake. I've heard people say before, as pertaining to rat snake identification, that if you see a snake and your first thought is, how in the heck did it get there? It's probably a rat snake. They're excellent climbers. You can see that this guy up there in the corner is coming out of the eaves of a house, but they have no problem climbing through trees, through buildings, whatever it might be. Excellent climbers. In appearance, again, if you remember back to that spread of all the different species that you could kind of see in the US, there's a lot of variation. In general, they tend to be a patterned snake. They tend to be kind of dark. The pattern tends to be more defined in younger snakes and get blurrier in older snakes. And this is also a large species, so up to 6 feet. If you see a snake slithering around your farm and you're like, oh my goodness, that snake is the longest snake I've ever seen, it very well could be a rat snake. So let's talk about what everybody's concerned about, right? And justifiably so. Depending on where you live, you might have venomous snake species that you need to be concerned about. And feel free to drop in the chat if you've heard this before, but it's really, really common for people to give you two pieces of advice for telling venomous snakes apart from non-venomous snakes. And the first one that I always hear is eye shape. A snake with a slit-shaped pupil, like you can see here in this picture on the right, is a venomous snake, and a snake with a round pupil on the left is a non-venomous or quote unquote safe snake. The issue with that is that one, it's not true in most parts of the world, and even in some parts of the US. In some parts of the US, it's true. In other parts, it's not. We do have venomous snakes with round pupils. And the other problem is that these snakes, any snake, like take, for example, this venomous eastern copperhead here, they may have a slit pupil, but when the pupil is exposed to low light, it expands just like our pupils, it dilates and it appears round. So these are both pictures of an eastern copperhead. One of them is just in a high light condition, one of them is in a low light condition, and they look very different, right? So you can't rely on eye shape to determine if a species is venomous or not in general. Not a super great way to tell. Can work sometimes, can not work other times. Also, you got to be pretty close to a snake to be staring into its little snaky eyes. And if you're that close to a snake and you're not sure if it's venomous or not, I just wouldn't put myself in that situation, to be honest. That seems a little like courting disaster. But that is not generally a super reliable way to tell. The other thing that I do want to point out on here real quick is that if you look over this guy's eye, you're going to see a scale that gives him sort of like a mad appearance. So he looks a little angry. He kind of has like a frowning scale. So do keep that in mind for the future because we will refer back to that. The other thing that I always hear folks talk about with identifying venomous versus non-venomous species is the head shape. So a lot of the times people will say that a venomous species has a triangular or like a wedge-shaped head because they have venom glands situated kind of at the back of the head that give it that triangular shape. And then non-venomous species will have, you know, a rounded head that kind of blends into the shape of the neck and the rest of the body. However, it's pretty common for our non-venomous species, like this young rat snake, to spread its head out into a wedge shape in order to appear venomous, to be more threatening if it's being bothered by a predator. So we'll see an example of that again later. So really not a reliable tell either. If you see a wedge-shaped head, it still could be non-venomous. If you see this round pupil, it still could be venomous. They're not, there's truth to both of those, but they're not what I would rely on to identify whether or not you're looking at a venomous species. And whether or not a species is venomous is certainly, you know, I would not blow off that concern from people at all. I definitely understand, especially if you are out and about on your property a lot. Maybe if you have small kids, if you have animals around, it can be concerning to think that there might be a venomous species on your property. If you have any doubt about any snakes that you might have a picture of or anything like that, I'm also happy to take a look at those pictures. You know, I've definitely had people send me pictures before, just wondering what species it is, if it's venomous or non-venomous. I'm always happy to check that out and point you in the right direction if I'm not sure myself. Another thing that can be misleading, particularly about rat snakes, is that they will exhibit a defensive behavior that's very much like a rattlesnake. So if you live in the US, you're familiar with rattlesnakes. They have a specialized scale at the tip of their tail that when they shake it, it makes a rattling sound, and that warns potential predators or humans that are hiking and about to step on them that there is a venomous snake in the area. However, we'll see in a minute, this rat snake actually will do something similar. They'll put their tail into an area where there's lots of dry leaves, or, you know, something that will produce sound, and they'll vibrate it. They'll vibrate it like very quickly, and it will produce a sound similar to a rattlesnake's tail. So even if you see this or hear it, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a rattlesnake. There are, among, you know, snakes, there are many species that do this, and rat snakes are one of them. So we'll check out this little guy real quick, and you'll see his tail right there. The other thing you can see about this guy, I don't know if the quality will be good enough on Zoom, but you can also see that he is showing a wedge-shaped head. He has his head spread out into a wedge shape, so he's really committing to the venomous snake look. And that's, you know, not normally how they would hold their head. This one's obviously reacting in, you know, a defensive way, and he's obviously scared and worried about something. So moving onward, I just want to touch on a couple commonish species of venomous snakes, or groups of venomous snakes, that you might see if you're in the US, that do share their range with rat snakes. And one of these that people are often concerned about is the eastern copperhead, which is this guy right here on the right. And there are some differences that you can look at between them. First of all, you're going to see, we talked earlier about that like angry scale over the eye, and you are going to see it gives this copperhead kind of like an ornery expression. He looks a little ornery, right? You're going to see, very much like the rat snake, some banded patterning and coloration. But you're also going to see on this rat snake, you know, a very dark head with a light under like chin area, and the copperhead not so much. So when you look at the markings on a copperhead a little bit closer up, or not even closer up, I wouldn't recommend, you know, getting close enough to a snake. You can certainly stand far back and see these markings as well. What you're going to see is you're going to see a pattern of bands that, instead of the rat snake, where it's kind of like blotchy and random, they're very much uniform, and they have this like triangular Hershey's Kiss look to them. So from the side, they look like a triangle. Each band is wider at the base than it is at the top, and they meet across the spine. So if you're viewing them from above, it looks like an hourglass. And they also have these kind of keeled scales. They look almost like rough and scaly and dragon-like versus the rat snake, which I always think looks like a fake alligator purse or something. And that rough, that keeled scale look to these gives them almost this like pixelated appearance to the banding on it. So look for that Hershey Kiss banding. Or hourglass if you're looking at it above. Look for those keeled scales. Look for that mad eyebrow. Very similar situation with the eastern timber rattlesnake. First of all, and this is true of copperheads too, they're chonky. They're big, hefty snakes. Rat snakes are oftentimes long, up to 6 feet long, but they're long and kind of agile. Rat snake or rattlesnakes and copperheads and some of our other venomous pit viper species, they're just big, chunky, like kind of docile, slow moving snakes. This is a wide snake. You can see it's very thick. Again, it'll have that mad eyebrow look to it, like you'd see with, you know, your copperhead, similar scale. And they also have keeled scales, so you kind of get this like pixelated appearance to the pattern as well. Now, I know that all of these things are very well and good when you're looking at it on a PowerPoint on a computer, right? But when you're outside, you catch a glimpse of something and you don't have time to sit and think necessarily through all these identification tips. When in doubt, it's always a good idea to, be careful. When in doubt, if you've been bitten by something and you don't know, it's always a good idea to seek medical attention. But in general, the more familiar you become with the common non-venomous species that are hanging around your property and your community, the more it jumps out at you when you actually see a venomous species. You're like, oh, that's very different. And if you ever have any doubt about what species you're looking at, whether it's venomous or non-venomous, I do invite you again to contact your own local extension folks. There are some wonderful Facebook groups out there that I'm happy to recommend to anybody. If you reach out to me afterwards, that will help you identify snakes in your area if you have pictures or descriptions. Or you can always send me an email and I can get it figured out for you to the best of my abilities. So when in doubt, err on the side of caution. But generally, especially as poultry owners, many of us kind of are perhaps more familiar with the rat snake than we've realized. So where do these snakes fit into pest management? Okay, this is where I got to get you to hear me out. What can they do for you? So our instinctive reaction to seeing a rat snake in the barn, in the chicken coop, whatever it might be, is not great, right? We think about all the eggs that are getting eaten. We think about that, our hens might get eaten, our chicks or whatever. Generally we tend not to have a particularly friendly approach to finding a snake in the chicken coop, but they can function as part of an environmentally friendly multi-component plan for pest control. And I have multi-component plan bolded because I do want to make sure that, I'm not painting an unrealistic picture, right? These are snakes are a component of a management plan. They're not, in most cases, in most circumstances, they're not the only thing that you will use for pest control. And then they are used for pest control. So they are not going to completely eradicate a pest problem in most circumstances, but they are going to help you control pests around your chicken coop. So I mentioned at the beginning that when I think of poultry pests, I think of, outside of course, things that are going to cause disease, microorganisms that are causing disease. I think of rodents. I moved on to a farm a few years back that had probably the worst rat infestation that I've ever seen anywhere on it. And they have been incredibly damaging to not just our poultry, but honestly also all of our livestock. It's very hard to keep them out of grain. It's very hard to keep them out of hay. It's very hard to keep them from destroying, woodwork in the barn. It's very hard to keep them away from electrical, things in the barn like brooder lamps and livestock water heaters and all kinds of things. There's many ways in which they can cause very expensive damage. And they can also cause, any of a number of illnesses and that kind of thing, which we'll touch on a little bit. But worldwide, they are an incredible threat to food production, and chickens are not exempt from that. There's this quote up here from Dr. Gary Whitmer from the USDA APHIS National Wildlife Research Center, who, does certainly recognize that they are a very problematic pest, but he also points out that removing rodents from ecosystems is not always the best management option. And to be honest, it's not always even possible. And he goes on to say that sustainable agriculture attempts to ensure the profitability of farms while preserving and protecting the environment upon which they depend. So going back to the idea of all of us being components in an ecosystem, we do need to preserve that ecosystem to the best of our abilities to ensure that it can continue to sustain food production, right? So what can they do for you? Part two. Well, how much are they actually going to eat in terms of rats and mice around your barn and chicken coop? We don't exactly know from a scientific standpoint how many rats a rat snake eats in a year. It's kind of like how much wood a woodchuck chucks. It's one of those mysteries of science, right? Um, but one study that I found did suggest that they will eat up to 9 pounds of rodents, which is just a horrible visual. It's one of my least favorite visuals I think that I've ever heard. And if you think about it, like a white-footed mouse is like an ounce to an ounce, like a half an ounce to an ounce or so, I believe. So you can kind of do that math and divide it up for yourself how many white-footed mice fit into 9 pounds of rodents. Ah. And they also perform a really important service for us as people who work with the land, who work on the land, by removing reservoir species for tick-borne illnesses. This does not pertain as much to chickens and poultry, but I always like to tack it on here because ticks are really sort of an ever growing concern, I think, for many of us as we're sort of facing up to the expansion of tick-borne illnesses across, in particular, the United States. There is one study that kind of famously came out. It's been a few years since it came out. But what they did is they looked at how many ticks rattlesnakes were eating on accident. So what they'll do is that the ticks will attach to the white-footed mice and deer mice, which are a reservoir for Lyme disease. They hold the Lyme disease, but they aren't affected by it. Ticks attach to them, ticks become infected with it, and move on to a host that is affected by Lyme disease, like us or our dogs or our kids. And they found that because rattlesnakes prey on white-footed mice and deer mice, they're continually removing this reservoir species from the environment. And as they do it, they're eating all the ticks that are attached to the mice. So that can add up to quite a bit, 2,500 to 4,500 ticks per year in that study, which is a lot of ticks just being taken out of the environment. And nothing survives a snake's digestive system. So these ticks are just being removed from the environment via accidental consumption by rattlesnakes. And this is, certainly me hypothesizing, but I think it's reasonable to assume that any of our other snakes, like rat snakes that eat mice, would have a similar useful effect on the ecosystem. There's a ton of tick-borne illnesses that we're all obviously need to be concerned about as humans. Alpha-gal syndrome, I know is like a big one that's talked about here where I'm from in Kentucky. That's the red meat allergy. Sometimes people will call it anaplasmosis or ehrlichiosis, Lyme disease, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And not only are many of these miserable, but many of them are becoming increasingly common and at an alarming rate. They can be very expensive to treat. And they can affect you, but they can also affect your livestock production for some of these. Like I believe anaplasmosis is, a big concern for folks that raise cattle. Chickens, not so much, but If you are a poultry owner, you're probably outside a lot. You're probably, sort of exposed to nature and thereby exposed to ticks a lot. So this is definitely, I would say, a vote in favor of keeping that ecosystem intact, because when you remove snakes from an environment and other tick predators from an environment, you can create a hotbed of these tick-borne illnesses. So what can snakes do for you? Part 3. They can be removing rodents that spread diseases directly to your poultry. Now, I am not a vet, but we've all heard of the bubonic plague, right? We all know that rats are gross, unscientifically speaking. And they can spread a lot of things that are contagious to your poultry, or that can affect your poultry. And a recent study, and I need to look more into this. I need to figure out the citation. I don't know where I left it. Looked at rats being a mechanical carrier, so basically carrying it on their fur, for H5N1, which is the avian flu, a big concern for folks right now, or even a vector for H5N1, so become infected with it, which can be a big issue because there's basically no way to rat-proof anything. These big poultry farms, more than likely there's an access point for rats when there may not be an access point for wild birds, but the rats are going in and out. They're, being exposed to potentially infected wild birds. They're coming into poultry farms. So it was a really interesting study regarding the way that rats and other rodents can facilitate avian flu infections in flocks. And they also just take, specifically in this case, rats out of the environment, which is great for me because I have lost many more chicks and eggs to specifically rats than I've ever lost to snakes. Um, the rats clean me out of eggs as soon as they get to them. They eat a ton of eggs, and they have also chewed up chicks and adult chickens. I don't know how common rat predation of chickens is, to be honest. It's not something that I struggled with before I lived in my current farm. Um, but I certainly have lost many more eggs specifically to rats than I ever have snakes. So what can the snakes not do? We don't want to be unrealistic in our expectations in pest management, right? Snakes are not rat poison. They will not eliminate all of the rats. They will not take care of the problem so that you never have to do anything again. It's not a one size fits all. It's not a Band-Aid, but they are a component of an ecologically friendly pest management plan. So I've kind of co-opted this term here, integrated pest management. There's a quote from the EPA on here. It's an effective and environmentally sensitive approach to pest management that relies on a combination of common sense practices. So basically, when we're thinking of creating an integrated pest management plan for our backyard flock, our, whatever it might be, you're thinking of what are a bunch of different things that I can squish together into a cohesive plan that will reduce this pest problem without going from zero to the strongest poison that I can find, which many folks, for many reasons, might wish to avoid. So things that you want to think about when you're sitting down and thinking about, okay, what is a way that I can, form an integrated pest management plan for my chicken flock? First of all, what's the trouble? What are you dealing with? Are you dealing with rats and mice? Are you dealing with rats or mice? Are you dealing with, some other type of pest? How dense is the infestation? So do you see like one here or there? Or is it like every night your entire building gets chewed down? Um, and then what level of control are you comfortable with? So you're probably not going to be able to get rid of every single pest on your property, but you're going to be able to control them. What that looks like depends on your preference and your needs, right? So you might be okay with seeing a mouse running out of your chicken coop every few weeks or something, but you're not going to be very happy if you see a mouse running across your counter. The level of control that you can tolerate is different for different environments and different folks. The next thing you want to think about is what are ways that you can exclude them. And a big one, of course, is securing food, making sure that you don't have a bunch of food spillage, you don't have bags out that can be chewed open. You haven't created a nice, friendly neighborhood for pests where they have access to food, they have access to nesting areas, they can get in and out of buildings easily, they can get in and out of your chicken coop easily. You want to make it difficult for them to exist in that environment, which I know is easier said than done. And then another component that you can think about is repellent. So predators don't just function as like lethal, a lethal control. They can also function as a repellent just by being around the area. So, this includes snakes, this includes dogs, this includes, predators that would cause a rat to think twice before it ran out in the open on your property. Um, a lot of the times, I think when I think of repellents and pest management, I think more of like wild birds. And, if you've ever seen like people hang up like pie tins or something by their garden or put in those like plastic fake owls. There's lots of different methods of repellent depending on what the pest is, on what the issue is. But certainly predators can be one of those. And we'll touch on the ways that snakes can help out with that here in a second. And then lethal non-chemical control. So these are like your snap traps, your bucket traps, all of your traps that don't rely on poison. Hawks and owls can also be effective control of, rodents, but obviously as poultry owners, we have concerns with hawks and owls. Snakes are naturally non-lethal chemical control. They are going to be eating the snake, eating the rat if they can catch it, removing it from the environment. And then, kind of think of other biocontrol methods like dogs, cats, that kind of thing, might fall under this group as well. And then last of all, as kind of the last resort, rather than going from 0 to 60, you're kind of working your way up to lethal chemical control rather than going to it as a first line of defense. Now, with lethal chemical control, a lot has changed over the years in terms of specifically rodent poison. A lot of the times you'll see, nerve poisons, you'll see anticoagulants, but there are some eco-friendly ones out there. There's one that I have not tried yet, but I have seen great feedback on that I think, should I need to go to that length, will be my next step. That's made out of cornmeal gluten that basically the rats consume it and dehydrate to death. So although many pesticides or poisons that are used with rodents are very environmentally unfriendly, there are some environmentally friendly options that are out on the market now that will not harm some of our other, lethal non-chemical control and repellent like dogs, cats, snakes, that kind of thing. You do have to remember with poison, when you put it into the environment, into the ecosystem, um, it doesn't stop with the rats. It works its way up food chains. It works its way to the snakes, to the hawks and owls, to the dogs, to the cats, to the soil, to whatever it might be, depending on what type of poison it is. But just remember, when you think about integrated pest management, you're thinking about it as all of these things are things that I'm putting into the ecosystem, into the environment, um, and how are they going to affect it? And that's why we sort of work on a scale of escalation, right? Instead of going directly to the most lethal control. So what might this look like? Well, it's not like you're going to go divide it up, perfectly into all these different categories and that kind of thing, but kind of, just as a quick example of what an integrated pest management plan might look like, this is kind of what I've been using for the last little while. And it is, I would say, fairly effective in my situation. Your situation may look different, but you can see here a big part of the control for me is controlling access to food. Another big part of it is dogs. I use working dogs around our property. And of course, we are also pretty snake friendly out here. I can't be on here encouraging you all to let the snakes live unless I am practicing what I'm preaching. So we do have a very snake and wildlife friendly property here. And then when it comes down to, sort of intervening with lethal, uh, you know, intervention methods there, bucket traps and snap traps. Sometimes we'll use those to knock back the population. And then again, I mentioned that there's that pest or poison that I've been looking into made out of cornmeal gluten that has seen some pretty good results for some folks. So the size of these pie slices might look different for you. Maybe you can basically control all of your rodent problems by, excluding them from the area. Maybe you have one very ambitious and industrious snake, and most of your control is, in this repellent or lethal non-chemical control area. Like, who knows? So snakes provide, again, both a lethal control and repellent. There are studies that suggest that even just having snakes in your barn and in and around your property will repel rodents. Even if the snakes never catch a rodent, the shed skins left behind, the smell left behind, those are all things that rodents can pick up on. And it may make the environment much less friendly to them than it might otherwise be. So as well as, actually catching and eating rats and mice, on a large scale, they are also just hanging out and making it less friendly to rats and mice to be around your property. So in terms of where they fit into an integrated pest management plan, both a repellent and a non-lethal chemical service. A lethal non-chemical service. I said that wrong. Repellent and lethal non-chemical service. There we go. So let's just say you're willing to give it a try. All right. There's a big, big old ugly rat snake that comes out of your garden every year. And, normally you don't have a friendly interaction, but you've decided that you're gonna give him a try, and you're gonna let him hang out and hopefully eat some of the mice that have been bothering your chickens. What are some ways that you can have a friendly co-working relationship with the rat snakes in your area? Well, first of all, what could go wrong? The snakes are eating my eggs. Probably. They probably are. I'm not going to lie and say that they're not. But you do want to think about what level of loss is acceptable to you. So almost no matter what your situation is, you might have to face up to some type of loss from predation with eggs, poultry, livestock gardens, whatever it might be. And again, it could be that you're already losing eggs for whatever reason to whatever pest. And it might be that snakes can help you control that. Again, I lose more eggs to rats than I've ever lost to snakes, but I'm not bitter about it. I kind of consider the occasional egg that I lose to snakes to be the snake tax. The snakes are eating my chickens. That is much less likely. Again, I wouldn't say anything is possible. A full-size chicken is bigger than what most snakes are willing to tangle with, most rat snakes. If you see a dead chicken and it is just dead, abandoned, and its head is kind of like compressed and wet, it could mean that a rat snake has constricted it, killed it, and attempted to swallow it head first and given up. I've never actually seen that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure that it does, but it's not particularly common for like an adult rat snake with some sense to go for something that large, right? Now, on that note, they could certainly take chicks and small pullets. So be aware of that when you have like brooder boxes, when you have chicks or smaller chickens out and about, and be sure that you are being conscious of eliminating entry points into the actual coop to reduce snake mortality on your chicks and your pullets. Fake eggs, these can be really detrimental to the safety of snakes if you are, trying to encourage them around your property. If you've not seen these before, which I'm sure you have, they're just like a little fake egg that you can buy and teach the hen where to lay. You just put it in the nest box and hopefully it convinces them that that's a good place for them to lay eggs instead of hiding them in the rafters of your barn. And generally speaking, snakes, can smell if an egg is real or not, but sometimes they will eat one of these and then it has to be surgically removed for the snake to survive. It can't be regurgitated or anything like that. It can't be digested. The snake will die unless there's some type of human intervention. So you can see there's one on an x-ray here that's showing up in the snake. And this is super easy to prevent. I like to glue them just to like a wooden, a little wooden base, something that keeps the snakes from getting a hold of them because they're secured down. And then it has the added benefit of the hens won't knock it out of the nest and lose it on the floor of the coop. Plastic netting, this can be detrimental to snake safety as well as other wildlife. I'm sure there's certainly, a place for it, but just be aware of where you're using it, how loose it is, how accessible it is to wildlife, and, be aware that it can be a real risk of entanglement for snakes and other wildlife, such as birds, and, potentially your livestock, your pets as well, because once they become entangled in the plastic netting, it's virtually impossible, certainly for snakes to get out of it by themselves. So I'll finish up here with just a couple frequently asked questions that whenever I'm proposing to people that they let their snaky friends live and eat mice for them. Usually, there's a handful of questions that I kind of get um, repeatedly that are very valid concerns. So I will address them quickly, and then I will be happy to address any other questions that might come up or share my contact information so that you can send them my way after the fact if you would like. But first of all, will snakes by themselves get rid of all your rodents? Again, I know I'm kind of circling back on what I've already talked about, but no, they're part of a management plan. Um, very few times in wildlife management and even in livestock, I'm sure, does one thing fix the problem forever, once and for all, and snakes are no different, but they can be a very valuable part of an ecologically friendly, multifaceted pest management plan. Can you relocate snakes? It's best to avoid it. If you're, say, for example, if you see a nice big old rat snake on the road, you want to take it back home to eat your mice. Um, Generally, rat snakes have high site fidelity, which means they're very loyal to the area that they, live in. They have a very small range. We talked about that earlier, and they become very confused and disoriented when they're brought outside that home range. So a lot of the times it doesn't end well for the snake. If you have no other choice, like your relative calls because, maybe you've got a reputation now as the weird snake person in your family, and your relative calls and says, hey, if you don't come and get this rat snake off my porch, I'm gonna, whack it with a shovel. Go get the rat snake and bring it back and put it in your barn. It's better than being whacked with a shovel. It's just generally not super successful all the time. Will they bite? Will rat snakes bite? Yes, anything can bite. They're rarely a medically significant bite. I've been bitten by a lot of rat snakes, and every single time it was my fault. It's hard to get them to bite you. They're not aggressive. And the bite, when you do get it, is even when it breaks skin, it's very shallow. Now, any bite can be medically significant if it introduces bacteria into the broken skin, but it's not like a rat snake biting you would be any more, significant than any of a number of small animals with, little tiny teeth. Certainly, my toddler's bite is much more medically significant. So with that, I will just say again, thank you for having me. Thank you for hearing me out, whether you're here on the live or you're here after the fact. A big thank you to Dr. Jacob, of course. And there is my email there on the bottom if you want to shoot me an email, get in touch, ask me any questions about snakes or anything else that you think might be relevant to what we discussed today. I'm happy to either get you an answer or point you in the direction of somebody that can hopefully get an answer for you. Um, so having said, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Dr. Jacob.
Okay, we have one question with the IPM components exclusion. You mentioned block tunnel. What exactly does that mean?
Oh, good question. It just means I have bad grammar. All I meant was like with me, my main problem is rats, and they tend to build like big, giant, complex tunnels from the outside of the building into the building. And we will just use uh, gravel or, any of a number of other things to fill them in and block the tunnels. That's the way that a lot of rodents will access your spaces, through tunnels. So blocking them in whatever way works best for your environment can be a good way to exclude rodents from your coop, your barn, whatever it might be.
Yeah, makes sense. Anybody else have any questions? We're almost at the 4 o'clock hour, but we have a couple of minutes if you want to ask questions. While you're thinking about it, next month's webinar, excuse me, is general nutrition and mixing your own poultry feed. It's on March 3rd at 3 p.m. If you are mixing your own feed, that's where the exclusion comes in, making sure that all your ingredients and all your feed is in containers that the rats and mice can't get into to make living.
Yes. And
Yeah,
I will say one thing I love, although of course you need to make sure you have a lock on it for child safety purposes, is old freezers. All my feed is in old freezers now.
it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Anna. I really enjoyed the presentation. I don't know if I've decided on friends or foes yet.
You heard me out. That was all I
I heard you
asked.
out, yeah.
Yes, that was all I
I
asked. We
think
don't have
that
to.
it would depend on the poultry farm that you have as to, because rat snakes will come in and get eggs and it's hard to keep them out. If you can
Mhm.
keep them out of the barn so that you don't eat the eggs, but are still in the environment, they might, keep some of the rodents and rats away. So that might be good. I have a personal dislike for snakes, and that comes from being in Africa where every single snake will kill you in one way or another.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Um, so I tend to react badly to snakes, but I do know they play an important role in the ecosystem, and I try not to, react by hitting them over the head. So
Well, listen, that's all we can do, is all we can do is try. And also I fully acknowledge that I am, here in Kentucky, farming in Kentucky. I'm kind of coming from the place of privilege, and that I really don't have to worry about any like lethally dangerous venomous snakes under most circumstances. Like even copperheads, they're medically significant, but like not compared to some of the snakes you might encounter in some other continents, definitely.
yeah. Okay, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Anna, again. Thanks for agreeing to talk to a poultry group about snakes.
For sure.
I
Yeah.
think it was really good. So thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. And I hope I'll see. Oh, we got another question in just a minute. One came up. Oh, that was excellent. My kind of philosophy. So they, obviously you won them over. So
Excellent. And everything's a balance. Remember, like take care of your chickens, take care of yourself, keep yourself safe, your chickens safe, hopefully your snake's safe, and do what you got to do. And no
yeah,
one can hold that against you.
yeah. Okay, everybody. Hope to see you next month. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oops.